I begin by thanking Dr. Nitesh Chaudhary and Dr. Navneet Singh for giving me this opportunity to be part of NALCON. My topic is how to interpret survival curve, and I believe that this assignment has been given to me because I am either editor or editor in chief of the 5 journals that you'll see below. So let's start by a visual image. In the tank that you see here, in the top two images, the turrets are going upwards, in the bottom two, the turrets are going down. So what is the reason for this? Any person with a armed forces background will know that the top two tanks are Indian tanks, so their head is held high, whereas the bottom two tanks are enemy tanks that we have captured, and therefore their head is looking down. Now, this is the interpretation skill. 4 years ago in Hindustan Times, this statement was made that global mental illness, a third of that is seen in India and China. And what is such a great thing about this heading? How misleading the heading can be. Because one third of illness in India and China actually represents the one third or 36% of the population that resides in our country. Now let us look at this image of strike that paralyzes part of India. And you can see that somebody is trying to smash the motorcycles of people who are on the road. But if you take a closer look, you will see that all the people on the motorcycles are smiling. And this really tells you how breaking news is faked. And this is actually a fake photograph. So we should always be careful about what is hidden when we look at survival analysis. Now, survival curve analysis is nothing new. Okay, the first one that I could identify was way back in 1669 about how 100 people would have survived up to the age of 86. So, why are we using survival analysis? The first is why not compare mean time to event between your group using a t-test or a linear regression? If we do that, we ignore census. So why not compare proportion of events in your group using risk odds ratio or logistic regression? And this ignores time. So these two are not the way to do it. So we normally use a Kaplan-Meier survival curve. Now in the Kaplan-Meier curve, you will see that there are a drop in the curve. Now each drop in this curve represents an event. Okay, all of us know that, right? Now every event leads to a drop, but what are not considered an event and therefore will not show up as a drop are lost to follow-up and end of study. So patients who do not have an event are considered censored, which is random right censoring. And therefore we know that they survived at least a specific amount of time, but do not know the exact time of the event of their survival after the specific time of the study. Now look at what do we now see from this curve. The drop in the curve occurs after every event, and between events, the estimated survival remains constant. That means the line is horizontal. Survival curve does not drop at censored times. That is, for instance, lost to follow. But the size of the drop changes after censoring. So after each person is censored, the next event will lead to a bigger drop. And I think this is something that not many people understand. What follow-up time is not an event, curve does not go to zero. So in the solid line, you can see that there are 4 patients who are lost to follow-up. They may be dead, but if you look at the graph, it will show a 40% overall survival. And these 4 censored people are shown in the red arrows in the enlarged portion. So this is an important thing that we should keep in mind, how it can be misleading. Also, we should pay attention to confidence intervals. That is 2 standard deviations or 95% confidence interval that can be placed by Greenwood's formula on either side of the survival curve line. Now let us see what is unique in some 3 examples that I've taken. Here you have a study arm which is in dark color and a standard arm or the control group which is in gray color. Now you see the end of the line. In the study arm, the line ends at about 19 years, whereas in the control arm, the line ends at 29 years. Whenever you see the end of the line is different like this, even though the p-value is 0.001, you know that this is a historical control and therefore it has to be taken with a pinch of salt. What about this? Here you see that the survival curves are crossing, and in this instance it is probably at 6 months. Now whenever you see something like this, and I see that in the lower curve at the beginning, it represents a more intensive treatment that because of its intensity causes early mortality. But if the patient goes beyond the early mortality, then he has a plateau and therefore there is a chance of cure. On the other side, there is the other curve which shows a constant downward trend without a plateau. So there is a trade-off of intensive treatment which increases early mortality but gives a better chance of cure. So this is what the curve represents. Now this is similar to the curve that I showed you earlier. And here, for the first time, you will see that the number of patients at risk is mentioned below the x-axis. And you can see that after 15 months or after 10 months, you can see that the number of patients at risk are in single digits. This tells you that the survival curve is actually not reliable once the patients at risk in each arm come to single digits. Therefore, only what is shown at 10 months is something that is worth following. After that, whatever has happened could be by chance. Now, for the second part, I will show you some examples from lung cancer. And I've deliberately taken curves from older studies so that I do not take away the thunder from the other faculty who are going to present you the data that is ongoing. Now, this is Lux Lung 3 and Lux Lung 6. And here again, I want you to focus on the number of patients at risk. In Lux Lung 3, single digits start at 39 months, and in Lux Lung 6, the single digits start at 36 months. So if you see the graphs before 39 months on the left side and before 36 months on the right side, you will see that the separation is continuous, consistent, and is increasing further. So in both these instances, even though the visual impression is different, I would interpret this as showing a good response that is consistent and is separation is increasing as the time goes. Now that was overall survival. This is progression-free survival. On the right side is the whole group, on the left side is deletion 19. And you must be careful when you have a subset analysis like this. Fortunately, in this instance, the degree of separation and the continuous separation is there in both the arms. And therefore, what is seen in deletion 19 is also seen in the whole group. Having said that, we should also know how many patients from the whole group had actual deletion 19. For instance, if deletion 19 was seen in 80% of the patients in the whole group, then that might actually influence how the whole group graph is seen, and that should be kept in mind. Of course, in this particular instance, the difference, absolute difference, is so startling at 1 year that there is no reason to doubt that the p-value is highly statistically and clinically significant. Now, this is patients with brain metastasis. And here I wanted to point out another aspect where combined analysis of two studies are being done. Whenever you have a rare disease or you have a rare occurrence, there might be a need for combined analysis. But this combined analysis is like comparing apples to oranges, and therefore this difference, which is statistically significant, should be taken with a pinch of salt, especially since after 12 months, the number of patients at risk are really small. Now we come to when the curve starts separation. And this is progression-free survival between afatinib and gefitinib, that you can see that the curve starts separating after the median survival is reached. And this is very interesting. Now, why this happens? This could probably happen because we have not enriched the population that benefits the most, and therefore it takes a while before the effect on the responding patients is seen. Fortunately, if you look at this graph at 18 months and 24 months, you can clearly see that the separation is consistent and the separation is continuing. After that, when the uh, patients at risk is in single digits, the graphs start coming closer to each other, but this should not be interpreted as reduction in the outcome. This separation after the median is not only for patients who are getting TKIs, but you can see that the same thing is also seen in patients who are receiving immune checkpoint inhibition. In both these instances, once we have a better biomarker, once we can identify the patients who are most likely to respond earlier, we will have the separation earlier and we would be able to select the patients properly. Now, DIAS is, instead of looking at overall survival or progression-free survival, this is time to treatment failure. And this could be when the patients are continuing on the treatment even beyond the normal RECIST criteria, and they will continue till they become symptomatic, or as long as they have stable disease. Here also there is a reduction in the risk, and you can again see that at 24 months and at 30 months, there are sufficient patients at risk to say that this data is valuable. And after that, when the curves come together, there are hardly a handful of patients, and that part should not be considered while we interpret the result. And this is why in this instance, the p-value is highly statistically significant of 0.007. Now I move on to some of the new things. So often we say that the patient's response to a study arm is not showing overall survival difference because of the beneficial effects of subsequent lines of therapy. Now the people in UK Leeds have come up with a solution for that. And this new method is available to adjust survival curves and remove the confounding effects of subsequent therapy. This can be done for up to 6 lines of therapy. Can you imagine that? And this is not new. This was published in 2012, that the impact of second to 6th line therapy on survival has been clearly identified. There is also the confusion or problem of converging or crossing curves, and the statisticians have been smart enough to identify a solution for that as well. And you can see that at primary analysis, the p-value was not significant. It was 0.108. But after a 1 year additional follow-up, the hazard ratio became 0.82 and the p-value really became significant, 0.03. And this, in fact, allowed the regulatory authorities in Europe to give marketing approval for this particular drug. So there are new ways of interpreting the survival curves in a much better. For those who are initiated in doing things on their own, I would like to end by showing you that it is possible for you to draw survival curves from your data using Excel. And this is a very simple 6 easy step method of using Excel files to develop your own survival curves for your presentation as well as for your publication. With that, I thank you very much for a patient hearing, and I wish all the best for the rest of the conference.